and welcome to the HR People Pod, the CIPD's fortnightly podcast, bringing you the topical stories and expert insights on issues impacting the people profession and the wider world of work. My name's Leah de Silva. I'm a Senior Programme Manager at the CIPD Trust. We are part of the CIPD and we harness the brilliant skills of the people profession to support people who are facing barriers to either getting into work or getting on in work. And today I'm joined in the studio by
Kerri O'Neill.
Excellent. And
Idris Arshad.
Welcome to you both. Now I know that despite this being your debut appearances on the HR People Pod, I'm lucky enough to know our panellists very well. Both Idris and Kerri are big supporters of the CIPD Trust. They both donate their time as mentors to support people professionals who are trying to overcome their barriers and progress in the profession. So thank you for that. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the kinds of things that Kerri and Idris get involved in to support the CIPD Trust, do have a look on our website because our recently launched CIPD Trust Impact Report will tell you lots more about what they do and how you can get involved too. And talking of impact, let's get to know you a little bit more. What's had an impact on both of you recently? Anything you've been watching or reading that you've been loving? Let's start with you, Kerri.
I have recently read a book called The Over Story by Richard Powers, and it's a novel about trees, which I know you have to go with it. It's sort of trees and the sort of amazingness of trees infuses the people stories. It's set in America. It's absolutely amazing. I learned so many good tree facts, including when a tree passes away, it releases all of its good immunity to the other trees in the community. Amazing. As like a final gift to the forest. Isn't that incredible?
Love that. I feel that's like succession planning at its finest.
Absolutely. Mother Nature, she knows how to do these things well.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So add that to your read list if you've got one. Idris, anything that's stayed with you that you've been watching or reading in recent weeks?
Reading wise, I've got only a HR bookshelf.
Amazing.
In my bag today, I've got the HR Operating Model by Perry Timms.
Okay.
So really looking at how we need to be shaping ourselves as HR for the future, and a really interesting take on what that looks like. And so far a great read. Amazing.
So future-proofing the profession effectively.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so add those books to your read list if you haven't already. They sound absolutely phenomenal. So in a minute, we're going to dive into today's show. It is jam-packed. As a reminder, we use the topics as jumping off points for broader discussion because it's quite hard sometimes to know the infinite detail that surrounds them. It's been quite a high-octane week, I think we can all agree. We're going to come on and talk about other things to do with recruitment and progression later on in the show, but I think it would be remiss of us not to start with the biggest topic that's landed for everyone this week, which is, of course, Chancellor Rachel Reeves' announcement of the UK government's autumn spending in the budget. You couldn't have missed it this week because there was a leak a few minutes beforehand, so you had multiple opportunities to engage with it. There were lots of implications for employers and employees alike, I think, in the announcements that the Chancellor made, not least some of the information around the cap on salary sacrifice pension schemes that's coming in a few years' time, the rise in national minimum wage, national living wage, which will have implications for employers, the boost in apprenticeship spending as well, and future funding plans for the youth guarantee, amongst other things, as well as a couple of U-turns that we've been privy to today. So before we unpick all of that, I'd love to get some of your initial reactions about what you think might be welcomed by employers and what you think is raising a fair few eyebrows. Kerri, should we come to you first to get your reactions on the budget?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot packed in the budget, right? And I think if anyone's fully got their head around it, sort of, 24 hours, 48 hours after, then well done to you guys. I think we're still making our way through. I mean, what's great for me is, as you know, I'm Chief People Officer at Ipsos. So not only do we get to, to do the HR work, but we also get to see what Ipsos is finding out about the budget. And we know from the sort of earlier social media reaction that there's a lot of positives. So people are seeing real positives around lifting the 2-child cap on the benefits, a little bit of support around energy bills, albeit, probably quite easily eroded by them going up. Actually, interestingly, things like the rail fare freeze, people are commuting more again now.
Yeah.
That's really coming through as positives. And of course, the minimum wage for those who receive it. However, also lots of concerns. And I think employers are concerned about the cost of the rises, obviously, because it doesn't just impact the cohort of people maybe on the minimum wage. As we were talking to earlier, it changes the minimum banding for, them for other roles within the organisation. And, the freezing of the taxation means that more people are likely to tip into the higher tax bands as we move through the next few years. So certainly, I think it was still 77% of people in these initial stages still feeling that the UK economy will not be better off next year. And so a lot in there. And I think people are a little bit mixed still on their reaction to it. And certainly within my organisation, it is quite a mixed picture. Like, how are we going to continue to be able to afford the payroll bill and grow and do lots of other things? So this is a challenging time for HR professionals and businesses, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And great to have some of that fresh data and temperature checking from your organisation. Idris, bringing you into the conversation as well, what are your feelings having digested or semi-digested some of the budget already?
I think we saw a creep of information during the week come out, so nothing was too unexpected, but I didn't expect the kind of almost delay.
Yeah.
So, for example, the 2% salary sacrifice up until 2029. Good thing is it gives us time to prepare for it. It's not April and we have to rush, but there's questions around how much do we prepare and how much do we plan for. I think what it does allow all organisations and HR functions to do is speak to your people about the impact, because whilst we've got generic advantages of how this budget would help people, we've also know that people are going to be in unique circumstances and in unique households with different challenges. We need to find out how the budget is going to impact them and what we can do to help our workforces. So I think that's an interesting piece there to definitely be exploring as well. And I think it's just now really just focusing on what we need to be doing now and what do we need to do by when, and seeing how that lays out really. So good time for planning, preparation, but the uncertainty is still there. Are we going to be talking about the same things in 3 years' time? That's what I think is going to cause a bit of hesitancy as well in that respect when it comes to the announcements.
So how do you think HR professionals can start to prioritise how they tackle this? Because you're right, there's things coming in 3 years' time, there's things that are changing more rapidly, like the raise in wages and so forth. What do you think HR professionals should be thinking about?
Well, I mean, just to share what me and my team were doing, because I think some of this is, these changes in government sort of policy, also coupled then with the employment rights bill as well. And so what we've actually done, because there was just so many different issues on the table all at once,
of course,
we have a list of all the different proposals. So we'll be adding on the new ones that we're seeing coming through from this most recent budget. And I think things like the youth guarantee, as you mentioned, is a really important one for HR professionals to zone in on too, to see what opportunities are there. And then we then do an implication review. So what do we think this means for our business? And then we do a RAG status, so red, amber, green, on what we think is almost not great for our business and is going to need other discussions with finance, with our business leaders. Amber, like mixed sort of implication, through to green, i.e. this is positive for our business. And we do that. And I think that actually gives us a much more objective view. So, for example, when the Employment Rights Bill first came out, I was sort of like, this is going to change so much. This is really... But actually, when we did the RAG review, a lot more was green than I thought. So I think, they're doing an exercise like that for me and my team certainly just helps us have a step back, objective view, and we can then hone in on the exact issues that we think our business needs to pay attention to, and celebrate what's going to be positive, and then also be thinking, right, where are these amber things? What does this mean that we need to be planning or doing more work on? I think this really is a budget for the reward function. So I'm sure the reward element of our profession are really now starting to dig into what they're seeing and learning, as you say, about the salary sacrifice changes. I'm sure there's lots of modelling potentially going to start happening, and of course other things I think linked to the reward profession, but also quite a lot in here too potentially for our early careers teams and recruitment teams. I think the youth guarantee piece looks very interesting.
Would you agree with that, Idris? Is it that process of going through and examining what you need to do when, and perhaps coming up with some unexpected wins that you weren't sure were there?
Yeah, and to add to that, I think there's an opportunity to provide some real clarity to why we give certain rewards and benefits. I think that's it's an often less served area than others. But if we can really think about why is it that we're giving a certain amount of percentage towards pensions, why are we introducing employee assistance programs, really figuring out if we're going to give our workforces good benefits, why are we doing that? And then that brings us back to the whole people piece about what is it that we're telling people, the employer value proposition, what are they going to get from working with us from a holistic point of view. So it does give us that time, but I think the reward function you mentioned and what I would call a specialist skill set is something that's going to be a bit of a challenge as well as we move into that space of really getting specialists in and saying who can actually give us good advice, expertise, and help our workforces is a bit of a rarity, really. It's not, you don't find thousands of reward specialists. If you want to look at employee relations, you'll find probably thousands. So I think that's definitely an opportunity there to do that and really figure out, as I said, what is our reward and benefits offer and why are we doing it in the first place?
I do think that we also should note that there was some really good pieces in the budget for working parents.
Yeah.
So the lift of the benefit cap for more children, but also the support around early the nursery, free childcare places, the wraparound care in schools, the breakfast clubs, etc. I think to sort of balance some of the things, that's a bit more of a concern potentially, or it doesn't help me so much immediately. Actually, there are some things that are certainly colleagues are coming in and saying this is actually quite helpful for us. But I do think it is also becoming more complicated for employees, as you mentioned. So yes, employers too, but also employees. So we've had examples of colleagues saying to us, actually don't give me that salary increase because I don't want to go into that new tax band because it means a whole host of other things would go. And so that's quite an interesting dialogue, I think, to have with colleagues, and so that understanding of what are the different tax bands, what's linked to them, is becoming a much, much bigger conversation in my experience as the cost of living crisis continues.
Just on that.
No, please.
That financial almost education as well is missing. Generally about, do people understand how they're taxed? Do they understand how they can make the most of things like give as you earn and different schemes? I think there's a lot for us to do in almost educating our workforce on the topic of money. And I think it is a very a topic that has a lot of stigma attached to it. People don't like to talk about it, but I think it offers an opportunity for us to really help our workforces understand their money and their pay, and help them to make the most of it. Because as you said, it's good for some groups, it may not be good for others, but if we can help them understand how they can benefit and maximize their paycheck, that'd be really important as well, and something we can all do.
Absolutely, and part of that wider holistic conversation that you mentioned, I think, as well. Before we move on to some of our other topics, obviously today's announcement on the U-turn of unfair dismissal rights from day one, pushing it back to more like 6 months, there was some nervousness around that implementation piece anyway a few pods ago. Reaction from the panel on that U-turn today, Kerri?
I saw that last night, and I think on balance it looks sensible. I think none of us were quite clear how this sort of probation period was going to actually work, and how that was going to be written, and was that going to actually then mean quite considerable changes to things like contracts and policies and processes. I think the sort of, it seems, I've not seen the full detail, I hasten to add here, but it seems that, kind of like with what we had before with 2 years, that sort of time stamp is simpler for employers to understand and employees as well. I think, as I've said all along when I saw it in the initial stages, is I think it should help employers realise that they can't sort of with impunity just fire people in the first 2 years. We've got to put in fairer processes, better dialogue, earlier conversations about concerns, and have more clarity on how to turn things around, more adult conversations around performance. And so for me, this shift doesn't change that really. Sure. You've still got to do that. And I think it will really focus employers on thinking, what does that first 6 months of the role look like, and how do we best set people up for success? And it might also eradicate, of course, with the old rules, you could always it wasn't there, if you had a discrimination or a whistleblowing thing. So we sometimes had some slightly odd scenarios where people added those complaints in to add so they could be counted in the first 2 years. And we're sort of so hopefully actually it means that it's fairer for everyone earlier. But that but no doubt it's still another change for businesses and the profession to grapple with.
Absolutely.
I think it's good, again, waiting to see how it actually lands. But the for me, I think from two sides. As an employee, what do I want? And you want day one. Because if you were to be mistreated in those on day 46, you'd want to be like, I want some sort of justice. So I think it's good it's gone from 2 to 18 months. That's a long time. That's a good thing. So I'm of the view that if you're a good business, you've got nothing to worry about. Whether it's 1 day, 6 months, you're going to be good to your workforces and do things in the right way. The bit I always have concern about is where people do go through injustice and they don't feel like they can speak up. They're the ones most impacted because they're not going to go through the tribunal system. And so, often what I've unfortunately seen from lots of cases is that some really awful things happen in workplaces. The employee is impacted fairly immediately. They lose their job. The emotional stress and personal well-being is affected by it. And justice comes probably 18 months later, which is a long time in itself. So I think we're in a system that's, struggling. You look at tribunal claims, how delayed they are. Personally, I think day one would have just helped everyone, employees mostly, but would have tipped that balance in a way. A lot of businesses may say, but that's extra burden. But as I said, I go back to it. If you're a good employer, you won't worry about it because your intention is going to be there to treat your people well. And there may be some difficulties, but you'll navigate that. So that's where I sit on it. I obviously welcome it, but I think what's the difference between day 1 and 6 months? Most people now have a 3 or 6 month probation period. That's the kind of norm. So, what was the difference between 1 day and 6 months? Because that first 6 months, you're hoping someone gets accustomed to the organisation, comes in, has a connection. It's probably after the 6 months that things tend to go a bit pear-shaped for either the employee or the organisation. So I'm almost thinking, why 6 months? Why not 3? But why not stick with day 1? So again, it's welcomed. But let's see how it plays out until 2026.
Excellent. I'm going to move us on to our next topic, which is about, I suppose, the battle for talent versus productivity. So there's been some reports, I think, in People Management recently, citing a very well-known recruitment company talking about this nervousness and uncertainty in the jobs market. And as that sort of plays out, employers, in some descriptions, are waiting for that sort of perfect fit, off-the-shelf employee. And is that threatening that sort of hiring for potential opportunity of really developing your staff? And I'm really interested to get your thoughts on this, because there is obviously lots of pressure on employers to be productive and to go for that productivity through their staff. But also, does that mean hiring for potential is on its way out? What do we think about that? Let's start with you, Idris, because there is a tension there, presumably.
I find the topic of hiring for potential a bit odd in the sense that regardless of where you are, potential is not really, there's not a measurable thing to it. So I'm almost sitting there going, we're dealing with something we haven't really defined. And we jump between experience and potential all the time. And even experience we haven't figured out. We haven't figured out what's the right level. Is it from this sector? Is it this type of situation I wanted you to be in? It's a bit sporadic. So I think we need to go back to and think, actually, the people we get in, we know them off the basis of a paper application and an interview. We don't get to see the real them until probably 12 months down the line. So I think less of the labels and more about thinking about what you need in terms of impact from the roles and from people. So, and that will lean towards potential, because I believe everyone's got the potential, no matter where you're at, start of your career, middle or the end. You know, there's no kind of, I've reached my potential and that's it. It's always an ongoing journey, really. So from my side, I think it's something there is less and less of a job for life. People are moving much more frequently moving much more sideways. And so there's a lot going on in the market. There's skill shortages. There's a lot going on. What we've got to do to help ourselves is really figure out what we want from the role, but also what we want organizationally in terms of productivity. Again, defining what that looks like. Really saying this is what a productive person looks like, and then making the most out of a person. Go back to probationary periods. Why 6 months? Why not 3 months? And really maximizing, whether it's a year, 3 years, 5 years, just maximizing that experience that someone has with you and making the most of it. And whether that leads to them becoming a director in 10 years' time or not, you get what you can, and that helps both the employee and yourself out of that, really. So I'm much more for on the side of hiring for potential, because it creates more opportunities, it brings in diversity, it brings in creativity, innovation, it helps with your sustainability, it helps with your progression. It has a lot of benefits. A lot of people point to, but I need someone to hit the ground running. But when you ask them what is hitting the ground running, oh, it's this, but why can't you get that with this person? So I sit there in that thinking of hiring for potential is where you want to be, but also there's no harm with someone with 30 years experience in a role that they've been doing, bringing them in. I just think we've got to move away from the labels a bit and really think about what do we need for the organization, for the role, and focus a bit more on that. Otherwise we get into different realms.
So do you agree with that, Kerri? The labels are a bit of a distraction, a bit of a misnomer?
I do, actually. I mean, we're always actually hiring for potential. Because you don't know what the future challenges really are going to be in that world. I don't think the world of here's the job description and every single day is going to play out exactly the same as is the world we're in. I think even in what you think quite predictable jobs, things happen. The pandemic, for example,
of course,
the road closes, someone has an emergency in the workplace. I think we're not really in a world of predictability anymore. And so I think actually, if we're honest with ourselves, we're always hiring for potential. It's just what are the facts, what's the fact base we're using to judge that I think has got quite interesting. And in the past, we've typically used a sort of formula of have they done it before, i.e. experience. Whereas actually, I think what we're learning from neuroscience in particular, Idris mentioned this, is, we've learned that people grow and change and adapt and build skills all the way through their lives. We know more about neuroscience, neuroplasticity. And so I actually think what we should be looking at more and more as we recruit is around what's your mindset? How do you approach challenges? How do you adapt? How do you keep your skills relevant? How do you take information in? And what does it do to your behavior? Is your behavior fixed? Do you, and more about how do you also work with people? So how are your social skills? How's your ability to collaborate? I think, the work that's happening around skills, mindsets, and general sort of approach to challenges within the workplace will hopefully become more and more important. And whether we call that potential or not, I don't know. But that, I think, is the zone in which we will want to go, because we don't know what we're going to be facing. I think all we know is that we're potentially going to need to change our organisations a huge amount over the coming decade. And we'll want a workforce that wants to go on that journey, I think, in the main. And we want to set our workplaces up so skills, learning, growth is just a natural part of what we're doing versus kind of doing it through a program or an event or various things. So I think the recruitment kind of side of our businesses needs to work much more closely with the L&D sides of our business more and more, so that join up can really happen. And as Idris rightly said, thinking more about what's from day one the program we're putting in place to enable that colleague to be doing great things.
Yeah. And that point you make about development, it's the next stage of our discussion. I think PwC have a global workforce hopes and fears survey, and they were saying that in the coming year, 1/5 of the workforce will want to change jobs because there's a perceived either lack of development or they can't see where they're going to go with their current employer. And that leads us to talk about sort of that internal mobility piece. And you've both touched on developing people to set them up for success. So as a talent strategy, do you think organisations are doing enough to focus on that internal mobility piece about developing the staff they've got?
It's become more difficult for organisations too. I mean, budgets have become a bit more restricted, more focused around, probably less around learning and development. So I think there should be more of a focus on it.
Okay.
I think where the challenge lies is probably the honesty piece. I know that sounds a bit odd to say, but really being honest with people about what development looks like. In certain small organisations or bigger organisations, it's tough to develop and grow because of structures.
Yeah.
So it's important to develop people. Being honest with them about what progression looks like and what it is really crucial. Because often you look at people's career journeys, how they move through an organisation or move elsewhere, it takes a lot of things to happen. People to leave, structures to change, or it takes a lot of that. But I think the first piece about the communication piece, what is internal progression? Does it actually mean I move up every year to a new position? Does it mean I'll be CEO in 20 years? Not really. It actually means this. You'll probably get a really good work experience. We'll give you good variety of work, projects, and you'll develop. But it may mean that you may use that elsewhere because there won't be an opportunity for you. Now, that sounds negative, but I'm talking about honesty and clarity here, because the moment we mention progression, the first thought is upwards.
Yeah.
Actually, they are probably managerial level. We've got to change that definition of progression and give people skills in different ways. Now, the way we learn now is completely different. You know, the rise of podcasts, you know, the availability of information on AI. We've got so many ways to learn. I think we've got to try and now design and boundary that a bit more purposely in L&D for people, and saying when you walk in, here's good on mandatory training that you're going to have to do.
Sure.
But here's how you progress and here's what progression looks like. Some of it we can control. We can give you access to learning and development, a coach, but we can't guarantee you there'll be this specific position for you in 18 months.
Yeah.
And that honesty piece is what I talk about. And then what I said about before, we then maximise the time they've got with us.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. We don't know whether it's 2 years or 5 years, but if we work continuously to make sure it's a good experience for them, they develop and grow, as a result we benefit, that's where the focus is.
I love those sort of open and honest conversations about redefining what progression looks like. Do you agree with that, Kerri?
I do, and internal mobility has really come up me and my team's radar, along with succession planning, actually, and not old school succession planning, more succession pooling.
Oh, I like that.
I think, rather than planning. So we start to think, you know, what's the widest net of people within our organisation who could be potentially doing, you know, the big jobs, the critical jobs in the future, and actually just casting that net wider. Not only is it great, as you say, for representation and diversity, and actually it's a more exciting conversation that we can have about what actually are the things that you would need to have experienced or done or had a sense of how you would tackle in order to do these different jobs, and that's really opening things up. On the flip side, there is, I think, you know, in a really constrained job market, we've heard about this concept of job hugging, I think, haven't we? Where people are sort of just hanging on to their job for dear life. That there is that can make people be quite closed to go for other opportunities, particularly if they feel there's an element of risk,
of course,
around them. And so we're looking at the moment about how do we sort of ease people or give some sort of guarantees to people that if they try something new, you know, that they're not going to be sort of abandoned as such in that effort. Are their passports back if it doesn't work? You know, how do we de-risk that feeling for an employee, I think, to try something else within the organisation? We're also, we have a quite progressive policy as well around maternity, paternity leave. We offer equal time off, paid time off for both. And actually what's great about that is it opens up more opportunities for these short-term moves to cover a paternity leave for 6 months or whatever as well. And I sort of think, what are all the opportunities that we have, and could we think about our own colleagues and staff a bit more for those rather than always hiring outside. And I think it's another plus for the employee experience. Definitely. If people feel like not only could I potentially be doing this job, but I could be doing other jobs within our organisation. And we have some stories where people have joined Ipsos as a graduate and have, all the way up to CEO and things like that. And we really maximise that storytelling to show people that it can be done. But of course, that makes things difficult, even more difficult for those in the job market.
Yes.
And I was literally speaking to someone this week, a HR professional who's in the job market, and they said that more and more jobs are going to people already within the organisation. So there is a bit of a concern that I have about what that is doing a little bit too in terms of the sort of the wider employability prospects. But there's a trade-off in every scenario, isn't there? And I think that's the thing to navigate.
Definitely, and there's the balance there. It's that time in today's podcast where we're going to get you to get out your crystal balls and think about next year, because we're hurtling towards the end of 2025 at quite some pace. And it would be lovely to think about some of the opportunities for the profession. We've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about some of the things that are coming down for the profession in 2026. But what are the opportunities? Let's start with you, Idris. What are the positive things that the profession can look forward to in the next year, do you think?
I think the profession itself is in a really good place overall. I think it's moving in the right direction. It's getting more progressive. The opportunity, as we've alluded to in terms of the budget and the impact it's had on people, is that whole people experience piece. We've spoken about reward, we've spoken about progression, but thinking about that every touch point. How is it that people are going to get a good experience of work? It's essentially what the CIPD is about, championing better work and better working lives, but really focusing in on that. Because the motivation of people to work and why they work and what they go through are going to be unique. So if we can focus on the people experience in every aspect of it, from learning, growth, engagement, purpose, connection, we can really help people along in the workplace. So that, I think, is the greatest opportunity that we have, without mentioning the 2 letters that probably will come soon. But that I think is the most realistic focus and opportunity for next year.
Brilliant. And your forecast prediction for 2026, Kerri, what are you thinking?
I think AI, obviously it's been something we've been talking about in the profession now for a couple of years. I think AI has been largely about productivity. It's been largely about how do we sort of get some capacity, how does it help do some of the things that take us time to do. But I really think / hope that AI becomes much more about growth and opportunity for organisations. So it kind of recaptures people's desires to grow and help overcome some of the barriers to grow. So I'm hoping that the opportunity around AI to grow our organisations, to innovate within our organisations, crystallises in the crystal ball. And I think HR are in a really great place to work with our technology colleagues, to really say, actually, what are all the possibilities that AI could open up for us, but also how do we want to set the culture where there's potentially digital workforce, agent workforce and human workforce. How do we actually want that to play out rather than sort of muddling along? How do we want to architect how those 2 things better come together? And I'm infinitely excited about that. And I think we're seeing more research coming from Stanford University, for example, about the human agent workforce and how they can collaborate. So I think our conversation about AI will go on another stage through 2026, and I'm all for it.
Excellent. Well, fabulous to hear your excitement. I'm going to bring us to a close there, although I could talk to the 2 of you for the entire day, I think, actually, and fill lots of podcasts. But a huge thank you to Idris and Kerri for joining us today. A big thank you to our listeners, as always. Do tune in, subscribe wherever you listen to us so you don't ever miss an HR People pod. We are hurtling towards the end of the year, but do Look out for an extra treat. We'll be unboxing one more episode of the HR People Pod before the end of the year, and you won't want to miss it. It's with influential thinker David Liddell. I nearly forgot his name now. I'm so excited by the unboxing element of the whole of the HR People Pod. And it just remains for me to say a big thank you again for sharing your insights so candidly, and do join us in the future. I've been Leah de Silva, and this has been the HR People Pod.